2005. And if you can begin to catch the prophetic importance of what is going on from this pulpit in Columbus, Ohio, reaching 96% of America and nearly 200 nations of the world. We're not just here this morning gathered together for some little sermonette. We are standing prophetically to declare the thus saith the Lord to the ends of the world, and to by the grace of God see the light of the glorious gospel of the Prince of Peace shed abroad in the hearts of people from all wayward religions. Jonathan Edwards in 1773 prophesied this moment. What Edwards called Mohammedanism would fall. Here's what Edwards said: when the Spirit of God begins to be so gloriously poured forth at the end of the age. My God, are you getting this? I don't think you're getting this. Jonathan Edwards in 1773 said there's going to be a revival break forth. It's going to start in America. I have my beliefs that part of it is going to begin right here in the United States of America, in Columbus, Ohio, at 4595 Gender Road. Here's what he said in 1773, at the beginning of the 21st century, when the Holy Spirit begins to be poured out, Satan's Mohammedan kingdom will be utterly overthrown. And then, though Mohammedanism has been so vastly propagated in the world and is upheld by such a great empire, this smoke which has ascended out of the bottomless pit shall be utterly scattered before the light of that glorious day, and Mohammedan empire shall fall at the sound of the great trumpet, which shall then be blown. We're talking about a revival. We're talking about a reformation. We're talking about an upheaval, the likes of which this nation and the world have ever known. We're talking about a generational shift. We're talking about a transfer of authority. We're talking about an outpouring of the Holy Spirit to literally shake the foundations of the earth. This expectation of the fall of Islam was the central theme of the Great Awakening. God, I wish I had time to preach. I wish I had time to tell you that America has had two great awakenings. And I'm here to announce today, by the help and the grace of God, as long as there is breath in my body, I will believe for the third great awakening. I believe that the church is being roused out of its slumber, even as I speak to you in this moment. That great awakening was the founding revival of the revolution, and thus became the central theme of what might be called the founding dream of America. It must have come to no surprise to those who fought it then that America's first war was against Muslims. Now, very few Americans know that, and I can tell by the way you're looking at me, you're a little shocked at it yourself. Because you think the first war that we fought was against the British in 1812. And in actuality, our first war was the Tripolitan War. Fought against the Muslim pirates of North Africa's Barbary coast. It was a war that foreshadowed much in our history, complete with hostages and rescue missions and terrorist acts, and a Congress that would not decide whether it was engaged in a war or a police action. Though later generations would tend to see this and most wars in a non-spiritual term, Americans of that generation understood their battle as the Muslim captain of a ship manned by American captives did. He wanted his enslaved crew of Christians to know that they were to be treated harshly, quote, for your history and superstition of believing in a man who was crucified by the Jews and disregarding the true doctrine of God's last and greatest prophet, Muhammad. Clearly, the Tripolitan War was a battle of faiths, and Americans are reminded of this deeply religious conflict every time the United States Marines tell us through song that they were fashioned first on the shores of Tripoli. We sing and quote these little chivalrous of tradition. We have no idea where they came from. From the hills of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we'll fight our nation's battles on the land and on the sea. Tripoli was our first war. It was waged against Muslim pirates who took our people captive because they believed in a Jesus crucified by the Jews. Other examples of America's historic conflict with Islam could be cited, but the point is made. September 11th calls us to understand a fresh struggle that is deeply rooted in our past. It is a struggle with more than terrorism, with more than embittered third world nations. It is a fundamental conflict between the founding values of the West and the inherent worldview of a religious system that is at odds with that conviction. This is in our age of religious synchronism, which is the combination of different forms of belief or practice. It's hard to understand. But we find now we have no choice. The time has come. In fact, we may be already losing the battle. As I scan the world, I find that Islam at this moment is responsible for more pain, more bloodshed, more devastation than nearly any other force on earth. I look to the horrors of the African nation of Sudan. I find slavery. I find massacre. I find traumatic human upheaval of the sort that even beleaguered Africa has seldom seen. Nigeria, on a similar scale, is much the same. The hand-to-hand violence in the streets of Indonesia has astonished the world. The informed know that the Taliban had been sending refugees by the thousands over the border of Pakistan for years before the recent crisis, and not long ago the world was horrified to hear that more than 150 children were killed and nearly 250 more hospitalized when Muslim Chechen rebels commandeered a school in Russia. If I spoke of the persecution of Christians by Muslims, I could broaden even further the scope of what I'm saying. I'll limit myself to Muslims against Muslims. The world is scarcely aware that some 300,000 Kurds were butchered under sanction of the clerical fatwa or religious decree in Iraq. Before that, the war between Iran and Iraq was inflamed by the declared jihads of Shiite against Sunni and Sunni against Shiite Muslim. This was the world's bloodiest war in a long and tortured history of bloody wars. The list could continue infinitum a long time. There are some, of course, who will say that the violence I cite is the exception and not the rule. I beg to differ. Did you hear what I just said? Because what people are going to tell you, well, that's just the exception. Everything that I just articulated, well, that's just the exception, it's not the rule. I couldn't disagree with you more. I cite violence to you, and I beg to differ with you. I will counter respectfully that what some call extremists are instead mainstream Muslim believers who are drawing from the well at the very heart of Islam. It is said of Ishmael and his descendants in ancient times that they would live by the sword, and he was a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. I suggest that this is the spirit that has come to fill Islam, or perhaps that Islam encompassed from the very beginning. This would be nothing to worry about, you understand, if Islam was just some backwater religion on the fringe of history somewhere, but it is not. Unless Islam is checked from without, and unless Islam is reformed at least from within, it will become a force that shapes the future of our world as much as any other on earth. Do you know that since September 11th, I'm going to stagger you right now. Touch your neighbor, say, get ready. Because this is about to freak you out. Get ready.